The world has seen more upheaval over the past decade than ever before, and all over people are searching for scapegoats. But the modern world, in the spring of 1920, also potentially promises a more hopeful era, or at least a more normal one. This is Between Two Wars Season 2, a chronological summary of the interwar years, where we cover the zeitgeist, the culture, the technology, the art, the sports, and much more in the era when, for better or worse, humanity ushered in modern times. I'm Indy Neidell. The Great War officially comes to an end between the Allies and Hungary with the Treaty of Trianon. But conflict still rages to the east. The Ukrainian capital of Kiev has changed hands 8 times since 1917, as the Ukrainian People's Republic, the Russian White Army, the Russian Red Army, the anarchist Black Army, Romania, and Poland all fight for territory. Further east, new republics are established and recognized in Siberia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, often with violence immediately preceding or succeeding them. Meanwhile, the people of the Middle East might soon have new rulers as the Allied powers meet in San Remo to discuss the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire. With all the political machinations, there's a definite sense of conspiracy in the air. 3 editions of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion are released this year alone. The Protocols are a fabricated text that describes a Jewish plot for world domination. They were first published in Russia in 1903, though the first full edition was written by Sergei Nilus in 1905. The Protocols purport to be the minutes of a meeting in the late 19th century in which Jewish leaders discussed their plans for taking over the world by controlling the press and the economy and by subverting the morals of Gentiles. In this decade, Henry Ford, of Ford Motors, will fund the printing of hundreds of thousands of copies. In the 1930s, the Nazis will use it as anti-Semitic propaganda. Some German schoolteachers will assign it to their classes to be read as factual. Thing is, in 1921, it will be exposed as a fraud by the London Times. Parts of the Protocols are plagiarized from Maurice Joly's 1864 satire, Dialogue in Hell, which was an attack on French Emperor Napoleon III. Or they are heavily influenced by Biarritz, written by anti-Semitic German novelist Hermann Goethe in 1868. Several editions published between 1903 and 1906 were circulated in the Russian Empire to scapegoat Jews for the Russo-Japanese War and the 1905 abortive revolution. And now, during the Russian Civil War, as many white Russians flee the country to the west, they bring the Protocols along with them to blame Jews for the 1917 revolutions. The Bolsheviks are now shown to be overwhelmingly Jewish and are supposed to be implementing the plans discussed in the Protocols. With the anti-Bolshevik Red Scare going on in the U.S., excerpts were published last fall in Philadelphia as the Red Bible that recast the Protocols as a Bolshevik rather than Jewish manifesto. Wickham Steed, editor of the London Times, writes an editorial now on May 8th with the header, "The Jewish Peril, a disturbing pamphlet," though he will later retract his endorsement when his own paper reveals the Protocols to be a fraud. Prejudice this season is now actually becoming somewhat professionalized. On June 7th, William Joseph Simmons, founder of the Second Ku Klux Klan, signs a contract with Mary Elizabeth Tyler and Edward Young Clark, partners in the Southern Publicity Association, to organize support and membership drives for his struggling organization. The first Ku Klux Klan, KKK for short or just the Klan, refers to a grouping of fraternal associations that sprung up in the southern U.S. states in the aftermath of the American Civil War. Broadly speaking, they were battling to maintain white supremacy in the face of the federal government's dismantling of the Confederacy and the system of slavery. They developed bizarre rituals and habits of dress to create a sense of mystique and to intimidate their enemies, chiefly all freed blacks and their white supporters. Through lynchings, assassinations, and terrifying nighttime raiding parties, they seriously weakened the black and Republican political leadership in many areas of the South. But the federal government soon cracked down on Klan activity and its chapters, and it was suppressed in the early 1870s. remaining that way until D.W. Griffiths directs The Birth of a Nation in 1915. Now that film is truly a landmark piece of cinema, pioneering many of the techniques people will see even in the 21st century, with close-ups, fade-outs, and huge battle sequences. But its subject matter, controversial even at the time, is perhaps what makes it so notorious. It tells the story of post-Civil War America, where Klansmen are noble heroes protecting their land and their women from aggressive and sexually deviant blacks. The film inspires a great many white Southerners who grew up hearing stories from their parents and grandparents of the days of the Confederacy. One of them, Simmons, endeavors to recreate the glory days of the Klan, and on Thanksgiving night 1915, climbs Stone Mountain, Georgia with some friends. With a flaming cross above them and a Bible beneath their hands, they inaugurate the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. But passionate as they are about white rule and fraternal orders, Simmons and company don't really have a clear message, and so even in 1920, only have a few thousand members. This is where Tyler and Clark and the Southern Publicity Association comes in. It has already organized successful campaigns for the Red Cross, the Anti-Saloon League, and the Salvation Army, and they hope to replicate things with the Klan. They will set out on a very modern publicity campaign, promoting Simmons as an earnest civic leader in newspaper interviews, advertisements, and press releases. They will create a sophisticated financial base with initiation fees, membership dues, and the sale of merchandise and uniforms, using a lot of that money to then pay recruiters a finder's fee to get more members. Tyler and Clark will also expand the Klan's message to market its appeal beyond the concerns of rural white Southern males. Added to the roster of enemies are Jews, Catholics, immigrants, accused Bolsheviks, well, pretty much anyone not of Anglo-Saxon Protestant stock. The Klan will no longer simply be a fraternal order craving a lost past, but a modern defender of American racial purity and morality. The mass marketing techniques will work. Within months, the Klan will have added tens of thousands of members. In a year, it will claim to have millions. Well, more on that as it happens. But while modern media provides a vehicle for hate, it also provides a vehicle, quite simply, for enjoyment. We've seen a lot of firsts in radio over the seasons, and this one is no exception. The first worldwide sports broadcast is made on May 29th when the U.S. Navy transmits to American bases across the globe with updates on the annual Army-Navy baseball game in Annapolis. You also have what is probably the first ever virtual wedding in history when a bride in Detroit is married to a sailor in the Navy aboard a ship in the Pacific in a ceremony via wireless radio. And on June 15th, Australian operatic soprano Nellie Melba, one of the most famous singers of the early 20th century, can be heard in a pioneering radio broadcast from Guglielmo Marconi's New Streetworks factory in Chelmsford, England. The New Streetworks is the world's first purpose-built radio factory, giving Chelmsford the title Home of the Radio. And in 1919, 2 aerial masts of 140 meters each were built there. The factory has been recently granted licenses for experimental radio transmissions, and this is the first, with Dame Melba singing 2 arias and her famous trill. Supposedly, the signal can be picked up throughout Europe and across the ocean in Newfoundland. She is the first internationally known artist to make a radio broadcast. She's also the first internationally known artist that as far as I'm aware, that has a dessert named after her. The Peach Melba is supposedly inspired by Nellie Melba. You can look up the story of that yourself. She isn't the only woman in the arts making headlines this season, though. The Age of Innocence is serialized in 4 parts this year in Pictorial Review magazine. This is Edith Wharton's 12th novel, and when it's published in novel form, it will win the 1921 Pulitzer Prize, making Wharton the first woman to win the award. It's the story of life in New York during the Gilded Age of the 1870s and concerns the impending marriage of an upper-class couple. The bride's cousin, plagued by scandal, appears and threatens not just the marriage, but also the veneer of social respectability. The novel does delve into the mores and morals of the period, though it never outright condemns them. It is quite ironic, though, in its depictions of polished manners compared to inner machinations. It is also notable for its attention to detail and its accurate depiction of the period. I first had to read it in high school, and it was one of my favorite books we actually read in all of my high school career, my high school years. You guys should actually read it. You will thank me. There's a movie, but read the book. Book's better than the movie. Okay. And though 1920 is not an age of innocence, it does have its moments of optimism and global togetherness. The 1920 Olympics will be held in Antwerp this summer, but to open them is a week of winter sports now in April, as Winter Olympics do not yet exist as a separate entity. Ice hockey is introduced for the first time, and the tournament is also the first Ice Hockey World Championships. The games are from April 23rd to April 29th, with 7 men on a side. Canada, represented by the Winnipeg Falcons, takes gold. The US takes silver, and Czechoslovakia takes the bronze. There are also 3 figure skating contests: men's singles, ladies singles, and pairs. Finland takes the pairs, and Swedes take both of the singles. Interestingly enough, Magda Julin takes the ladies' gold without a first-place vote from any of the judges, winning on the strength of 3 second-place votes. Incidentally, she is also 3 months pregnant at the time. This season, we also see some pretty iconic products released to the public. The Yellow Cab Manufacturing Company is founded this year by John D. Hertz to make taxi cabs for the Yellow Cab Company, which he founded in 1910. If you wonder why his name is familiar, it's because he also gives his name to what will be Hertz Rent-A-Car after he sells out of the taxi business to concentrate on car rental later in the decade. In June 1920, Band-Aids are invented by Thomas Anderson and Earl Dixon in Highland Park, New Jersey. Apparently, Dixon's wife frequently cuts herself while cooking, and these prototypes allow her to dress her own wounds. Dixon works for Johnson & Johnson, who will go on to produce and market the product. Originally, they're handmade and not very popular, and it won't be until 1924 that a machine can produce sterilized Band-Aids. And from the humble Band-Aid to the big questions of outer space, on April 26th, the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History hosts the Great Debate between astronomers Harlow Shapley and Heber Curtis. The crux of the matter is the size of the universe, and if the Milky Way is that universe or one of many island universes, otherwise known as galaxies. Curtis argues the latter, and his arguments will be vindicated by scientists in the years after the debate. I started this episode talking about an anti-Semitic conspiracy and the soon-to-be-famous KKK. But as one wave of persecution rises, another one falls. The Red Scare is coming to an end this spring. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer's raids have rounded up some 10,000 suspected communists and anarchists, but Acting Secretary of Labor Louis Freeland Post thinks, correctly, that this is a witch hunt and cancels a couple thousand of the arrest warrants and most of the planned deportations. Palmer tries in April to get Post fired to no avail, and by this time is being criticized for seeing red behind every bush. In fact, Palmer is warning that the left-wing revolution will begin May the 1st. But when that date comes and goes uneventfully, he is ridiculed and loses his credibility. The Red Scare is over. In late May, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, publishes its damning report on the illegal practices of the Justice Department during the raids. Of the thousands of resident aliens deported, fewer than 600 had been substantiated with any form of evidence whatsoever. In June, Judge George Anderson orders the release of 17 arrested aliens and denounces the department's actions. A mob is a mob, whether made up of government officials acting under instructions from the Department of Justice or of criminals and loafers of the vicious classes. There will be no more raids. The public just isn't that bothered about the Bolshevik threat anymore. Communism has evidently failed to take over Western Europe, so why should it spread to America? Wartime mentalities, where external enemies are seen everywhere, are giving way to peacetime ones as people relax and start to enjoy life. Sports, music, and the infinitely more interesting topic of prohibition are what is now filling radio waves and newspapers. It's no surprise that Warren G. Harding has begun his bid to win the Republican nomination for the presidential election with a call for a return to normalcy. On May 14th, he tells the gathered audience at the Home Market Club of Boston that America's present need is not heroics, but healing, not nostrums, but normalcy, not revolution, but restoration, not agitation, but adjustment, not surgery, but serenity, not the dramatic, but the dispassionate, not experiment, but equipoise, not submergence in internationality, but sustainment in triumphant nationality. Little of this will actually happen. The world of the 1920s will be anything but undramatic, dispassionate, and unexperimental. Still, Harding's calls for a clean break from the war years does point towards a new era where people don't see enemies around every corner. Of course, sinister forces are still at play, and global politics is anything but settled, but perhaps the birth of mass media, the flourishing of popular culture, and the march of technological progress means people might soon not be at each other's throats all the time. We'll see how that goes. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion has a long shelf life, being endorsed by world leaders even after 1945. If you'd like to learn about one instance of this, then check out our final episode from our series on the Suez Crisis right here whenever it comes up, right there. Our TimeGhost Army member of the week is Igor Zinoviev. It is because of Igor Zinoviev, that we can make all of our content on not only this channel, but also on our World War II channel. If you want to be part of this effort, join the TimeGhost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. Now, as Alan Moore wrote, the main thing that I learned about conspiracy theory is that conspiracy theorists believe in a conspiracy because that is more comforting. The truth of the world is that it is actually chaotic. The truth is, it's not the Illuminati or the Jewish banking conspiracy or the gray alien theory. The truth is far more frightening. Nobody is in control. The world is rudderless. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes. You know.